Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Rabago. I am a former undocumented immigrant to this country. I also work in the service industry or the restaurants. I pick the fields too. I work in the fields. I am a journalist, independent journalist with over 20 years experience and a new entrepreneur. And I'm also a new citizen. So I'm really looking forward to this coming up elections years. It is a pleasure to be here with you. This is a topic really close to my heart, and not only because I am an immigrant, but I do understand from reporting the issue for so many years how the lives of every person in this country gets impacted by this issue, whether they're against or pro-immigration reform. So thank you for having me here, and I think we're just missing one of our panelists this morning, so we can start. We'll start with Clint Bolick from the Goldwater Institute. That's you. Thank you, because I tend to baptize, so thank you for making that note. Welcome, and thank you for being here. And we also have Derrick Morgan from the Heritage Foundation. Raise your hand. There we go, at this time. And Mickey Cowles from Daily Caller. Thank you for being here. We're missing Mr. Danny Ortega from NCLR, so we can start with this debate. Yes. So let me entertain you for a little bit then at that aspect. Well, we'll start then. If you have 5 minutes to make your point. Do we start without Danny or we wait for him? I would start. You will start. Perfect. Okay. How about Mr. Bolick? 5 minutes to state your point on this issue, and it's legalization and citizenship. It's our debate. Go ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for all being here today, that you're here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Says a tremendous amount about the interest in this issue. My comments emanate not from my work at the Goldwater Institute, but rather a book that I co-authored with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush called Immigration Wars. It is just about a year old, and it is going to give birth to a paperback edition next month. So very excited about that. This book advocates truly comprehensive immigration reform, even to the point of literally getting rid of the current law entirely and starting from scratch, creating a 21st century immigration system based on the needs and realities of the 21st century. Imagine that. The most difficult issue that Jeb and I confronted was the issue of a path to citizenship with regard to...
Welcome, Danny.
Welcome, Danny. Yeah. With regard to the people who are in the country illegally, and we spent more time talking about this than probably everything else in the book. It really presents a dilemma. On the one hand, the reason I agree with many of the previous speakers that the reason that so many people are here illegally is that our current system is so profoundly messed up. That if you do not have a family member in the United States and you cannot squeeze into the relative handful of work-based visa programs and you're not a political refugee, there is no way in. So would I, if I were in economically dire circumstances, cross illegally into the United States? The answer is yes. I hope I would. And I think that most people would agree with that sentiment. Many of these people have become very important members of their community, contributing to taxes, contributing to the economy, and they have truly become Americans in every regard except their status, but they are living in the shadows where they are often victimized and unable to participate fully as Americans. On the other hand, they came illegally. They broke a very, very fundamental law. Our nation does have the right to its sovereign borders. And it is critical to the integrity of our immigration system to respect the rule of law. There must be consequences for illegal activities. There is also the question of fairness. There is something called, many of you probably know, the diversity lottery, by which 50,000 people are admitted each year into the United States. It literally is a lottery, and your chances of winning it are about 1 in 250. The vast majority of people who want to enter legally through that process never will. Is it fair to say to them, you know what? You should have just come illegally, because if you did, you would be on a path to citizenship today? We think not. As a result, we have proposed not a path to citizenship, but a path to permanent legal residency. We think that this sends a signal that in order to be entitled to the full benefits of citizenship,
Minute 30.
you must come legally. And in addition to that, we would associate that with community service and other things to earn that status. For young people who came here brought by their parents illegally, we see the situation very differently. These people have committed no wrongdoing. And in fact, for those who graduate from high school or who serve in the military, we would put them on a path to citizenship immediately because they truly are Americans. Jeb and I realize I've only had a moment to discuss this, but Jeb and I have been criticized for this proposal from both the left and the right, which makes us think that we're probably in the right place. We do think
I knew you were going.
that this could be
30
the
seconds.
breakthrough that we need to pass a comprehensive immigration bill in the House of Representatives, which is absolutely vital. And as a result of that, we think it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the way to help get comprehensive immigration reform passed.
Thank you, Mr. Bolick. Right on time. And now we welcome Danny Ortega from NCLR. You have 5 minutes to state your point. Wrong one. Just push over the mic. There we go. We share like good friends here.
Yeah, back in November of last year, I had the opportunity to go on a mission where Latino leaders from the United States and Jewish leaders from the United States were able to meet with Jewish leaders out of Mexico City. And it was a very, very interesting discussion. It was 3 days of presentations. And, of course, the issue of immigration was on the table, especially as it relates to us from the United States, both the Latino community and the Jewish community, to explain to the Mexican community what is it that's going on in the United States with regard to this subject. And I learned from that discussion, like I've learned from many discussions here, that if you go to the Latino community, the number one priority is the 11 million people who are here without documents. And the focal point is blinding, okay? Now, there was a time when the Latino community not only had its eye on that, but it also had its eye on enforcement. And while we were fighting over not militarizing the border, not having enforcement to the levels that the Republicans and the conservatives wanted, they were eating our lunch on the other side of the aisle on the issue of the 11 million. This time around, I think it's a little bit different. So as a part of my explanation to this group, I said, look, there are 4 areas that you should be concerned about in the whole immigration reform debate. It's not just one or the other. It's not enforcement alone. It's not allowing 11 million people to legalize their status, and the drop line now with an earned path to citizenship. There are other factors here, competing factors that are extremely important. There's the substance of immigration law, which is extremely complex. I practiced in the area for close to 20 years out of my 37-year career and got out of it, but it's very complex. I tell, if you want to understand the tax code of the United States, people will go, no, thank you, I don't want to. I said, well, the same thing with the immigration law when it comes to the Immigration Nationality Act. It's just very complex. And then on the other hand, you want to understand the process of how sausage is made in the U.S. Congress. Another very difficult and complex, I meant legislation, I'm sorry, not sausage. Very complex issue. And so I said, So the presenters, the people who wanted me to present said, Danny, do us a favor. And this was a really hard ask. Be objective about presenting those areas. Don't necessarily just your point of view. I declined to do it. But anyway, I did do it, and it was very enlightening to me. And when you get into the 4 areas, which is enforcement, the visa backlog that we've talked about before, the 11 million people who are here without documents, and of course, the future flow of workers. And in every one of those, I presented an objective view of both sides. You know, I said, look, on enforcement, it's over. The conservatives have won that. There's no way in hell we're going to do anything to lessen enforcement. As a matter of fact, the more we talk about it, the more they want it. And they want more. From $6 billion to $35 billion in enforcement. On the backlog, we're for it.
And at 30.
Yeah, we're for it. The bottom line is that, you know, there are people that have been waiting in line, and we all were taught from the time we were little kids, you can't cut in line, we get it. On the undocumented, there is a big debate, and the debate here is it both legal residency with an eventual path to citizenship, or is it just legal residency? Both sides have dug their heels in, including the debate within the Latino community. Let me get back to that by closing, by saying on the issue of future flow of workers, it's a labor business issue, and clearly we're on both sides of that. Now, on the U.S. citizenship issue, the question is this. In the Latino community, and unfortunately, we don't have more Latinos here, are we willing to give up the possibility of legal permanent residence for not 11 million people, because not all 11 million are going to qualify,
30 seconds.
but for millions of people, if we dig our heels in, that it has to include a path to citizenship. If you ask the undocumented community that question, not those who are legal residents, not those who are U.S. citizens, the undocumented, the answer is quicker than you can get the question out. I want to be here legally. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want my mom and dad to be deported tomorrow. And so the Latino community has a really strong interest within itself to say,
Thank
where
you,
are we?
Danny. Thank you. Time's up. And we go now with Mr. Derrick Morgan from the Heritage Foundation.
I have more to say, really.
We'll continue with that. We know that. Okay. Time's up.
Thank you, Mary, very much for that, and thanks again for having me here. Again, I think we do have a lot of areas where we can find some common ground and some agreement, and I wanted to highlight for you, we talked a little bit about one heritage paper. There's another one back there as well called The Positive Path Forward for Immigration Reform, which we put out this year, that outlines how we ought to think that the Congress ought to address these issues. The question really is, how should we reform the immigration system? Because we know we have to. We know there are false dichotomies. Often we're given false choices when we should be recognizing some shared views. We know that high-tech identification should be implemented, regardless of other reform measures. We agree on this much, I think. We know that we must encourage highly skilled workers to come to the United States when we're competing for talent globally. And we know we need a process that welcomes those who come legally and smooths their entrance into the United States. We know that this legal system has to work better. Those are real reforms. We know that mass legalization or amnesty, depending on your preference, is not really reform in that sense. Reform, as a term, is kind of a mystery, right? It's really vague without any specifics. What do we really mean when we say it? Well, it's time for plain speaking. If we mean reform has to equal legalization, let's just say so and be honest about it. And we may disagree on the merits of an amnesty or a legalization. Yet we know that whether we have an amnesty or not, more must be done. And we have a history of a mass legalization going back to 1986 that gives us almost 3 decades of experience. So we need to learn from that experience too. I think an amnesty without real reform will lead to pressures for further amnesty without end. Well, I think amnesty is the wrong policy for 3 reasons. It is not fair to those who came to the country through our convoluted and sometimes difficult immigration system. And we all know people like this. They try to play by the rules, and they've done so in this area too. Amnesty sends the wrong message to them and says, don't even bother. It's really a slap in the face. We need a legal immigration system that makes it easier to play by the rules. Many did things the right way, and it's unfair to reward those who did not do so. It's also unfair to those who did not come to the United States unlawfully because they respected the law. And there are many people that fall into that camp as well. Amnesty is not just about fairness, it's also about money too. We discussed the economics earlier, so I won't rehash that. But I do want to just expand a little bit on what I said earlier, is that even worse than the financial aspects are really from a moral point of view, we're talking about putting millions of people into our strained and broken safety net, and really into an economy right now that's not helping those who want to advance, and we need to fix those problems. Our welfare system discourages work and marriage because benefits are cut if you make too much money as a family. You know, there's a lot of people that have effective tax rates of 60, 80, sometimes even 100%, where it doesn't make sense for them to take a higher paying job because they would lose so many government benefits. And that's just not right on so many levels. And the overwhelming majority of immigrants who come to the United States come with a strong work ethic and sense of family. We should not put them into a system that discourages those good values. And if we do not fix our safety net now, our system will be strained to the point of collapse. Okay, so it's unfair and it's costly. Will it even solve the problem? Well, it actually won't. The Congressional Budget Office looked even at this comprehensive bill in the Senate that we've alluded to a little bit, whose proponents say it has the most rigorous enforcement and border security provisions ever in the history of our country. Well, CBO looked at it and they said that if we passed this bill, we would have millions more unlawful immigrants in just a decade or two. That means even if we passed another painful and divisive amnesty, we would find ourselves back in this same situation within a generation. The day we pass amnesty, the problem starts all over again. We have to realize that what we do today sends signals and creates incentives. Jan noted this earlier. Like the pull of gravity, passing an amnesty again will encourage more unlawful immigration. CBO confirms that. In 1986, we had many of these same arguments, and Congress passed an amnesty saying it would do it only this one time. And yet, here we are again. If we do pass another amnesty, it will be even worse because people may see it as a
30
signal
seconds.
that we'll have a series of amnesties. I'm quite certain that if we do this, we'll be having this same debate when today's high school freshman graduates college. We can't pretend that the Senate approach will solve our nation's immigration problems. It won't. But what we should do is work from a position of common ground. Consensus is possible around things where we have agreement, and I think we've heard some of those things today. The way to address our immigration problems is not trying to address everything all at once, like Congress did with Obamacare. It's not a way to build trust. Instead, we need a piece-by-piece approach on where we agree first.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Time's up. And now it's turn for Mickey Koss from the Daily Caller. Your point in 5 minutes, starting right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for this discussion. I've learned a lot. I'm happy to be here. When Clint's book came out last year, he seemed to be behind the curve because people on the pro-reform side were confident that they were going to get citizenship, and here Clint was with a thing saying they should settle for half a loaf of legalization without citizenship. But now it looks like Clint was right too soon because there is now a big push to settle for the half a loaf that he suggested. There was also a big article by Peter Scarry in National Interest, which I recommend to everyone read, basically advocating the same solution. I think it's not a good idea. Just because the left and right are against it doesn't mean it is a good idea. Maybe the left and right have a point. If we worry about the incentive it creates to future illegal immigration, and the reason why the 11 million is so controversial, I think, is because it does set a precedent, as Derrick said, for whether we control our immigration policy in the future. If you're in Guatemala or El Salvador or Bangladesh or Mexico and you're toting up the incentives and disincentives, surely it's a very positive incentive to coming here illegally if the previous generation got to stay. If they got to stay and get a driver's license and be legal, that's a big incentive. And if you add citizenship to that, it doesn't really add that much. So it creates all the bad incentives for future illegal immigration that we worry about. It also lowers wages for low-skilled workers, which is my big concern. And a legal non-citizen competing for a low-skilled job lowers the wage just as much as a legal citizen. So from the point of the lowest skilled workers in our society who we want to be able to raise a family, as the Interfaith Coalition says, it makes it harder for Americans to do that, just the same as if it was citizenship. I do think the argument that it's disrespectful has a lot of merit. I mean, here we are literally creating a second class of citizens. There are precedents. There are Samoans who have second class citizens, but that's a tiny number. Here we're that's in the tens of thousands. Here we're talking about millions. It also adds to what I think is the ugly side of this debate, which is the way it could lead and has in some cases led to disrespect for unskilled work. People say, well, Americans don't want to do that work. Karl Rove says, I don't want my kids to pick tomatoes, as if it's just if there's something not respectable about picking tomatoes. And here we're creating basically an entire second class of people who we will be able to identify as not full citizens, who will largely be doing those unskilled jobs. I think that's a really bad idea. We want low-skilled workers to vote. This is Paul Krugman's point from the left. We don't want a society where the people who are doing the lousy jobs can't exercise their rights to change the laws and protect themselves. So that's a bad idea for that reason. It's also, I think, I worry that Mexico is a special...
Minute 30.
Okay, I worry that Mexico is a special case because it's the only country that shares this huge border with us. It has a long history that's alternatively friendly and contested. There was a poll of Mexican families in Mexico, a respected poll, this is a Pew poll, 52% agreed that Mexicans have a right to be in the U.S., 66% agreed that the U.S. government has no right to limit immigration. I submit if you took that poll in Italy or India or Japan or China, you would not get those numbers. Mexico is special, perhaps for good reason, perhaps because we stole large parts of the Southwest from them. But the feeling is different. So if you worry about that Mexicans might feel the pull of dual allegiance, denying them citizenship when they come here illegally seems a bad idea. You're going to exacerbate that
30
problem.
seconds.
It seems to me you could have amnesty. There's an obvious way to get amnesty. That's to do the enforcement first, make sure that this is the last wave. And then I think the vast majority of Americans wouldn't have a problem with giving full citizenship, not half citizenship, to the 11 million who are here.
Thank you so much. Now, one of the ideas that keeps coming after seeing the point of view of our four panelists today, it's the legalization. And that second-class community that would be created by only giving legal residencies to that 11 million immigrants, undocumented immigrants living in the United States right now. My question to you, it might be a little bit rhetorical, but do you think the Founding Fathers would it settle to become a second class from the Native Americans when they got here? Would that be something that now we would be discussing? Danny, you mentioned that legalization might be, if we ask the 11 million immigrants right now, that they will settle for them. Would it be fair to have those here without a voice, without a vote?
Absolutely not. I mean, clearly, I am of the position that any reform should include an eventual path to citizenship for the reasons that you just voiced in your question, as well as some of the reasons that were voiced over there. I mean, clearly, if you've got people who live in this country and pay their taxes and live by the rules, they should have a right to say who it is governs them. They should have a right to the full benefits of society. There's no question about that, and I'm for it. The issue here is not whether we should or should not have citizenship. To me, the question to me is, what do we do under the current political environment to take people out of the shadows, to allow them to live fulfilled lives without fear? Okay? Now, if the answer to that is, let's wait another 2 years when there may be a different political environment, or let's wait another 6 years for a different political environment, or the movement for U.S. citizenship is stronger than it is now, who is it that's most affected by those kinds of decisions? Who is it? Is it the U.S. citizen? Is it the U.S. resident? or the people that Latinos, particularly activist Latinos, continue to say that they're fighting for and continue to say that they represent. And it seems to me that there's a definite conflict here about needs and wants. I get it. I'm for U.S. citizenship, and I don't think that anybody should be a second-class citizen. But when you take the immigrant community today, in the conditions that they're living in, especially in this hate environment that we're living in, can we truly say that we will not accept anything but full citizenship is the way to bring them out of the shadows? We need to discuss this issue. We need to really look at it from a processing standpoint in the Congress of the United States.
Mr.
And
Bolick,
not
what do
just
you
the
have to add
values
to
of
that?
U.S. citizenship.
You have something to add?
I do. I think that we need to learn from the mistakes of the 1986 reform measure, where we did have amnesty, and the amnesty did lead to additional illegal immigration, which is inflaming people today. And so what we have are a lot of folks on the conservative side digging in their heels, calling things amnesty, as Derrick did, that are not amnesty, that have serious consequences, and using that as a way to thwart immigration reform altogether. That is a very, very big price to pay. So I think that permanent legalization is really a route in the right direction. The other major flaw is, I think it was Tamar who identified with the 1986 reform, was that it didn't reform the underlying law and make far more opportunities to immigrate legally available. That is what we need to do this time, is to dramatically increase the opportunities for legal immigration for people who are coming here to work. And just one last point, I want to thank Mickey for bringing a copy of my book, which I failed to do. But when Mickey talks about all of these reasons to oppose permanent legalization, his alternative, he used the word enforcement. I assume by that he means deportation. And that may be
no.
what it comes. Okay, well, I look forward to you clarifying that. But whatever you have in mind is certainly, I assume, far less than extending to 11 million people
Thank you,
the
Mr.
opportunity for permanent legal
And Mr.
residence.
Koss?
Quickly, one of the problems is there was a lot of passion on that side. I don't think you're going to stop at half citizenship. I think if 11 million are legalized, you're going to be out there campaigning for full citizenship. So if we give non-citizenship now, we're buying ourselves a decade or two of controversy. It's going to be like the civil rights movement all over again, which is the civil rights movement is a great thing, but why have it if you don't have to have it? What I would, as a prerequisite for citizenship, my plan would be, and I think our side has been beaten down into this position, there are three big enforcement measures. If you do them, and if they survive court challenge from all the pro-immigrant legal groups that will challenge them, and they actually work, I would take the chance that that's good enough enforcement to say we're not going to have another wave like after '86, and we can proceed with some kind of legalization. The three are a perhaps improved but universal e-verify system, a border fence, which is a cheap and a lot cheaper than spending $20 billion on border agents. It just sits there. It doesn't collect union dues, doesn't pay union dues, doesn't collect retirement benefits, which may be why the unions don't like it. And the high-tech exit entry visa system that people say is feasible. Do those three things, wait 5 years, you'd get your full citizenship before the Senate bill will give it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And I'm sorry, Mr. Koss. And now it's the turn for Mr. Morgan. Do you want to add something?
I think Mickey's got a good point. It kind of underlines, I think, the idea of a step-by-step process that would potentially be workable, which is you do those things that I think people generally agree should happen now. You do those and you see how they work. You make sure that they do work, and you make sure you're not repeating the same mistakes you made in the past, and then you can talk about the more difficult issues like legalization.
Well, thank you. Now, we are about to start huge campaigns, obviously, with the coming elections, and immigration is always a topic. You would agree that it's a hot topic for elections. We have in the Hispanic community, the immigrant community, mixed households. We're talking about citizens, legal citizens, and undocumented immigrants. What's the cost, political cost, or the benefit of any immigration reform at this moment? Would like to start?
Well, I have been extremely critical of the Republican Party, which I left 10 years ago in large part because of its position on immigration issues. Been very critical of it on immigration issues. If the Republican Party wants to become extinct, it should continue its nativist approach to immigration policies. If it wants to thrive, if it wants to include within its ranks some of the most entrepreneurial, family-oriented, pro-American people that they could possibly find, they need to reach out in a very substantial way to immigrants. This is not just an issue of Hispanics, although it is very much an issue of Hispanics. In the last election, and when you now look at the numbers, the largest number of people entering our country today are Asian Americans, not Hispanics. A few years ago, the Republican Party got 50% of the Asian vote. The last election, it was 26%, less than the percentage of Hispanics who voted for Republicans. This is a really serious issue for the Republican Party. I really do believe it is an issue of survival. Why on earth would you keep people out of your party by alienating them when many of them share the most basic values of your party?
Thank you, Mr. Bolick. Now, Danny, if you can do or add in 90 seconds.
There are 900,000 U.S. citizen Latinos turning 18 every year for the next 20 years. 900,000. When you look at the political ramifications against those who are perceived to be attacking the Latino community on a daily basis, it's not going to work to build any political base. The bottom line is this one. The Latino community, in total, U.S. citizens, legal residents, and the undocumented, feel like they're under attack. The issue is always illegal immigration, but the Latino community no longer sees it that way. It sees it as a direct attack on them. And so I agree with Clint's position of the potential extinction of the Republican Party if it continues to go in the direction that it's going. It's important for them to recognize that George Bush got close to 40% before this movement started and was building with Ronald Reagan, especially because of IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, was building its numbers, and now it's down again. Even among the Cuban community, young Cubans voted in favor of President Obama. So this is not just the Latino community, it's minority communities that feel that that once one group is under attack, all of us can be under attack.
Thank you, Danny. Mr. Morgan, your input.
I think what's often missed in this debate is really how a mass legalization is unfair to those who go through the process legally. And if we repeat the mistakes of 1986 and encourage more unlawful immigration, we're going to see this cycle all over again. And so I think it's unfair to call all opponents of immigration reform as it's seen in the Senate as nativists for a number of reasons. But I think what I'd like to do is really speak up for those. There's about 4 million people now waiting in line to come into our country legally. We have 1 million legal immigrants come into the country every year. And I think it's an American value to stand for fairness and to make sure that we're not penalizing those who played by the rules. And so I would simply say for that reason alone, serial amnesties is not, or legalization or whatever you want to call it. If you have two similarly situated people and one decides to come into the United States unlawfully and the other doesn't, and then the first person gets to stay, it's really unfair to that second person who decided to obey the law. So yeah, that would be my point.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Koss?
I will, if we're, Derrick doesn't want to get involved in crude politics, but I will. Clint's advantage is thrown away in terms of appealing to Latino votes. He throws it away by then giving them half citizenship or non-citizenship. So you're buying yourself 20 years of Democrats beating you about the head and shoulders with the Juan Crow charge, the charge that you're creating a second class of Latino citizens and are disrespecting them. I don't see the political advantage to that. In terms of the numbers, yes, perhaps Republicans have more of a purchase on the Latino vote if they get this issue out of the way, but you're also, by that very act, creating more people who are apt to vote Democratic. My impression is, that the numbers in the long run work out slightly to the favor of the Democrats. That's certainly what my Democratic consultant friends say is, the Republicans think they're going to get our Latino voters. No, they're not. The only time when I could see it benefiting Republicans is this very next election, 2016, which would happen before all the new Latino voters come online, but after you have the goodwill generated by some sort of legalization. And Jeb Bush has written a book that might help him in 2016. That seems to be the one window when your argument might be powerful. And
10 seconds.
I come from California. I'm not a Latino. It seems to me the Latinos in California don't feel under assault. They're almost a majority, but they do support Democrats, and it's because they're Democrats. It's not because
you,
they
Mr.
feel
Koss.
under assault.
Now it is time to open for questions and comments from the audience, please. The mic, there we go. Right here. Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to make a general observation, but I'll focus on Mr. Morgan. That this construction of amnesty as this evil thing that sort of has been lurking at least since 1986, it's sort of a misplaced and misunderstood history of the fact that some forms of amnesty have been historical in the U.S., beginning with the 1929 Registry Act, which granted permanent residency to a person who remains undetected, given if they meet the time qualified. The Cuban entrant program, we allow Cubans who are, quotes, escaping communism to enter with authorization without any visas, and we grant them permanent residency and a path to citizenship. The Civil War, we implemented a military provision that grants someone who is allowed and who may have not entered the U.S. with formal authorization a path to citizenship. That was begun in the Civil War and is still in the present. So it sort of misplaces the understanding of amnesty or pardons or paroles in the U.S., including presidential pardons and other forms of amnesties that we have.
I think my response to that would be that you had a very clear message in the 1986 bill, and the sponsor of the bill stood up on the Senate floor and said, "We're only going to do this once. We're going to do this one time, and in exchange, we're going to have border security and we're going to have workplace enforcement, so we don't ever have to do this again." And here we are a generation later, and we're having the very same discussion. So my concern is that, and I think we have to be honest that for many proponents of the Gang of Eight approach, they make the very same argument. We need to do this, and we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again by having more border security funding or E-Verify or whatever it is. They're making the same exact arguments this time. I don't think there's any reason to believe it's more likely to happen this time than it was then. If you did a step-by-step approach and you made sure it was working first, then, as Mickey pointed out, you may have more of a compliance with the idea of going along with a
Thank you. From this side, we have an answer.
Well, I would say, first of all, no one that I know of is at the national level seriously advocating amnesty. What is being proposed here, whether it's a step-by-step approach, and that is a part of the Senate bill, or a 13-year probationary period, that's amnesty. I sure as heck, if I were late on my taxes and got 13 years of probation for it, I wouldn't consider that amnesty. The reason why the 1986 amnesty was so bad was A, it was an amnesty, and B, the problems of inadequate avenues of work-based immigration were not fixed. This bill, the Senate bill, reduces family preferences and expands opportunities for work-based immigration. Not nearly enough. As Tamara mentioned earlier, it's not nearly adequate. That's why you would continue perhaps to see some illegal immigration. But if you opened up the avenues further, as I hope and think the House will do, then I think you would solve the problem of illegal immigration regardless of what you do with border security.
Thank you. Another question or comment, please? Al grano, keep it short and to the point.
Thank you. My question is concerning what I heard the gentleman from the Daily Caller reference quite often here. And the question is, are you afraid that if we have comprehensive immigration reform, that there will be more Democratic voters? Is that your main concern? Because that was a point you brought up several times.
No, sir, I'm a Democrat. But Clint's point is that it will help Republicans, and I was just saying I don't think that's true.
Any answer from this side? No? Nothing to add. One more question or comment, the gentleman, Mr. Jose Peñalosa.
Thank you. I am an immigration lawyer for 23 years, and I would agree with Mr. Ortega that my clients would prefer something versus nothing. And that's the reality on the ground in the immigrant community from my experience. Now, Mr. Bolick, on the other side, folks do want to become U.S. citizens. And so current immigration policy allows people that come here on asylum claims illegally. If they win, they have a pathway to citizenship. Our friends from Cuba, they have a pathway through citizenship, and they come here illegally. We have folks who apply for what's called cancellation of removal, humanitarian-based program in court. If they win legal residency, they're on pathway to citizenship. So why can't we allow the folks that have been here and have an invested interest in this country, have children here, have businesses here, become U.S. citizens? And something else you should know is that many folks that immigrated through the immigration reform program, not all of them have become U.S. citizens. The major impediment is the language barrier. And so if the Republican Party has a great product to produce, politically speaking, what are they afraid of? And so those are issues that we're going to have to resolve, and I would like some answers, excuse me. Thank you.
Straight to the point, right? Here we go. Danny?
First of all, the statistics are that 40% of the people who qualified under the Immigration Reform and Control Act for permanent legal residence did not apply for U.S. citizenship. So not all of them necessarily do so. I think what we're not saying clearly here on my side of the aisle is that you've got to really take the Republicans or the gentleman over here on the left, the gentleman over here position from just a purely number standpoint. Given the environment that we're in and the way the Latino community and those who support them feel under attack, to allow potentially 16 million people, you're talking about 11 million who are undocumented, 5 million who are currently in line, okay? The possibility of both legal residency and U.S. citizenship, if we believe they're headed to extinction just on their positions, I believe they believe they're headed to extinction to allow people, that many people in that will ultimately be Democrats. So that political view of this, it seems to me, is something that's not talked about very much because nobody's going to agree that they're not afraid of the 16 million people and the potential that they're going to become Democrats. But I think we need to put it on the table at least that those numbers are overwhelming, not only to the nativists, that's a given, okay, but to those who see the Republican Party's numbers and influence really going to hell.
Thank you, Danny. From this side, any comment or any additions?
Well, I'm part of a nonpartisan research and analysis organization, so I don't pretend to speak for the Republican Party. So I don't know that I'd really care to comment too much on that aspect of it. But I think it's important to realize that we have a lot of very important issues to deal with as a country. Number one, the economy. There was just a poll out, I think it was today or yesterday, where only 3% of the American people said immigration was a major problem. And 60% say they want less immigration, not more. That wouldn't be my own personal preference, but I think that we have to realize that we need to take baby steps on these issues. We should work where we can now. We should fix a legal immigration system so that people who want to come here legally, they want to do it the right way. Let's make sure that it's an easy process. It's not encumbered by bureaucratic obstacles. There's 4 million people waiting in line. Let's clear that backlog and so forth, rather than going on to the most difficult issues, which is this legalization issue, which again I think is very unfair to those who go about it the legal way.
I agree as a non-Republican that the Republicans have problems that are not with Latino voters that are not just related to immigration, and with Asian voters. One of the reasons they lost Asian voters, I think, is because Asians began to perceive Republicans as anti-science, due to all sort of the creationist controversy and all sorts of other controversies that had nothing to do with immigration. Too many K Street Republican lobbyists think that immigration is the magic bullet that will fix them, so they can continue to obsess about lowering taxes for the rich, and all sorts of issues that turn off a lot of voters, and they can keep on doing that as long as they appease the Latino vote with some sort of legalization. I just think that it's a way to evade addressing their fundamental problems as opposed to the solution.
Thank you, Mr. Cass, and it's only fair that you would add something, Mr. Bolick.
Sure. I actually, the touchstone that Jeb and I used in our book was that it should be obviously more difficult to come illegally than legally. And what we came up with and what we proposed in the book, and what I think may sell in the House, is permanent legal residency. But we also think that the plan that the Senate came up with meets that criterion as well. And you raise a very good point. I think that it's a very difficult issue, but what we can't do is a wholesale amnesty. If we do that, A, we will be sending the wrong message, and B, we will be continuing to encourage people coming illegally rather than legally. So at the end of the day, I would be very satisfied if that part of the Senate bill became law.
Thank you. Now it's time. This debate is really interested and ongoing. It's a really hot topic, like we said, and passionate topic. We have 2 minutes of each of the panelists to give us or present us a solution. So we'll start with Mr. Koss. Starting right now, 2 minutes.
I've already outlined what I think the solution is, which is it's not a question of are you going to have enforcement or are you going to have some legalization. You're going to have both. It's a question of the timing. And I don't quite understand why people on the pro-legalization side don't accept, or rather I think I do understand, don't accept the enforcement first rationale, which is you do the enforcement things, you see that they work, you see that they're going to stop the future flow of illegals, and then you can have a legalization. I think the secret reason is they don't want the enforcement to work. They want the future flow. They are with the 50% of Mexicans who think Mexicans have a right to be here. They don't want to bite the bullet and accept the possibility that they're going to cut off the flow. The classic question that gets to it, what are you going to do after the legalization passes when somebody sneaks across the border illegally? Are you really going to deport them? Are they really going to deport people who make less than 125% of poverty, as the Senate bill says? No, they're not. So the hang-up in the debate is the unwillingness of the pro-legalization people to accept that this will be the last legalization.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Well, immigration has obviously built the country into what it is today, and it's to be celebrated. The fact that we have a nation we should all feel proud of, that people can come from all over the world, all walks of life, come to the United States, and even become citizens. That's something we all need to celebrate. And the fact is, we're kind of the only country in the world founded on an idea. That's a wonderful thing. It's hard to go to Japan and become Japanese, but you can come to the United States and you can become an American, and that's true no matter where you're from. And we need to celebrate that. We need to encourage that, and we need to encourage people to come lawfully, and not encumber the delays and the bureaucracy that they face now. I mentioned before we have a paper in the back that at least outlines our approach to how we think there's a positive path forward for immigration reform, and I'd encourage you all to read that. That gets into more details. We have to remember that we're the most generous country in the world, as Jan pointed out 2 or 3 times this morning. 1 million legal immigrants more than the rest of the world combined. I think that's that's reason for celebration. And let's fix the problems we can now, and we can deal with the more complex problems later.
Thank you, Mr. Bolick.
When we look back at our nation's history, do we think that if the Native Americans had a wall or a stronger arsenal, that European colonists would not have come? I think that's absolutely ludicrous. And so is the notion that as soon as we secure the border, we'll fix the immigration policy. They have to be done at the same time. Right now, there is no line for people to get into who want to come to the United States again, unless you have a family member or can fit into one of the very small work-based visas. There is no line. Until you create, or I should say recreate that line, which was at one time a mainstay of American immigration policy, it doesn't matter how much border security you have, you will not fix the problem.
Thank you so much. And we end with Mr. Danny Ortega.
In the 1900s, America welcomed immigrants, and they poured into this country in the millions through Ellis Island from Germany, Ireland, Italy, and most of Europe. As long as they weren't bad people and they didn't have tuberculosis, we weren't talking about walls, we weren't talking about border agents, we weren't talking about limitations on visas, they were welcomed. That is what made this country great. We wouldn't be a great nation without immigrants. But whether we remain true to that history and heritage is a major challenge. I, quite frankly, would worry if we didn't want more people coming to this country. There is no debate, however, that the current immigration system is broken and we must fix it. The challenge is how to fix it and at the same time ensure that it serves the national interest and adheres to our principles of equality and human dignity. Immigration law is complex. The Congress of the United States is complex, and so is this issue. And I say we err on the side of equality and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists, Clint Bolick with Goldwater Institute, Danny Ortega with NCLR, Derrick Morgan with Heritage Foundation, and Mickey Kass with the Daily Caller. I think something really important to keep in mind is that when we talk about immigration, it's a human issue. It's about families, the division of many families about the border, that border that we talk about, the enforcement. Thank you so much for having me here and making me part of this great event. Congratulations to LULAC for putting it together.